floor, back against the couch. You're crying. The kind you didn't plan. The kind that just arrives. And before you've even wiped your face, your dog is there. Not barking, not asking to play, just pressed against you. Still, somehow it knew. But how? There's no wound here, no blood, nothing to see. And yet something inside your body changed the second your heart broke. And somehow an animal on the other side of the room picked up on it. For a long time, scientists waved this off. Coincidence, projection, owners reading meaning into random behavior, convenient explanation. Except researchers actually decided to test it. Controlled conditions, repeated trials, heart monitors strapped onto animals. And what they found wasn't coincidence at all. Think about what that means for a second before we even get into it. An animal reacting to something you never said out loud. To understand how, we have to start somewhere you wouldn't expect. Not with the dog. With you. What actually is heartbreak? Not emotionally. Physically. Inside your body. Scientists scanned the brains of people going through rejection and loss, expecting to see emotional circuitry lighting up. That's not quite what they found. They found significant overlap with pain circuitry, the same regions that respond when your body is physically injured. As far as your brain is concerned, heartbreak and a broken bone aren't as different as you'd think. And it doesn't stop at a feeling. Cascades. Stress hormones flood your system, adrenaline, cortisol. Your heart rate shifts. Blood pressure climbs. In extreme cases, and this is real, this is diagnosable, the shock can physically weaken the heart muscle. Doctors call it broken heart syndrome or Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. It's not a metaphor. It's a cardiology diagnosis. So heartbreak isn't only something you feel. It's something your body does, which means it has to leak out somehow. Through your voice, your posture, even the air you breathe out. Here's the real question, then the one this whole investigation hangs on. If your body is broadcasting distress in ways you can't fully control, could something else actually be picking up the signal? Scientists suspected yes, but suspecting isn't proof. So they went looking, and the first place they looked wasn't the eyes. It was the nose. A dog's nose isn't just better than yours. It's operating on a different scale entirely. Estimates vary, but most research puts the number of scent receptors in the human nose somewhere in the low millions, a small fraction of what a dog carries, which can run into the hundreds of millions depending on the breed. That gap is part of why a trained dog can pick out certain scents diluted to concentrations most of US couldn't register at all. Researchers at Queen's University Belfast had a theory. If stress changes your body chemistry, a dog should be able to smell the difference. Simple test. Elegant test. Collect sweat and breath before a stressful task and after. Line the samples up. Let 4 trained dogs sniff through and pick out the stressed one. By pure chance, they'd get it right maybe a third of the time. Across 720 trials, they got it right 93.75% of the time. Impressive. But everyday stress is one thing. What about something heavier? What about trauma? Researchers at Dalhousie University in Canada pushed further, collecting breath samples from people recalling painful memories, over half of whom had a trauma-related diagnosis, then testing 2 dogs, Ivy and Callie, on whether they could separate that breath from a calm baseline. The result? 90% accuracy telling the two apart. The researchers themselves were careful here. This was a small, early-stage study, and they said as much. It needs to be repeated on a larger scale before anyone calls it settled science. But even as a first result, it's a striking one. No faces, no tears, no sound, just breath, which raises something worth sitting with. A dog may be able to register that you're struggling before you've said a word about it. But smell is only one channel. And heartbreak doesn't just change your chemistry, it changes your voice. So, what happens when an animal doesn't just smell your pain, but hears it? Goldsmiths College, London. Researchers built something almost theatrical. People crying. People humming in a strange, broken rhythm. People just talking normally. Sometimes it was the dog's own owner. Sometimes a total stranger. The expectation was obvious: dogs would favor their owner. Familiarity wins. That's how bonds work. That's not quite what happened. Dogs approached the crying person more. Owner or stranger didn't matter, and they didn't come over to play. They came in soft, nuzzling, licking, leaning their whole body weight in the way you'd lean into someone without needing to say anything. It looked unmistakably like empathy, but looks like isn't good enough for a scientist. So a follow-up study strapped heart monitors directly onto the dogs. Same setup, crying, humming, talking, plus laughter as a control this time. And this is where the story raises its stakes. The dogs whose own heart rate variability dropped the most, meaning they themselves were becoming physically stressed, were the ones most likely to walk over and comfort the crying person. Read that again because it matters. These dogs weren't observing your pain from a safe distance. Something in their own body was shifting to match yours. Researchers describe this as emotional contagion, not proof of human-like empathy, but a real physical state matching. When you fall apart, something measurable happens inside your dog too. That's the strongest reveal in this whole investigation so far. But if any crying human triggers this response, shouldn't it work on strangers every single time? Researchers went and tested exactly that. And the answer complicates everything. New experiment. A stranger, trapped behind a door, crying for help. If the theory holds, crying alone triggers comfort, these dogs should rush the door. They didn't. No extra urgency. No extra stress. No more effort to help the crying stranger than the one who was calmly humming. That changes the way most of us think about the empathetic dog story. This isn't a blanket, automatic response to any human in distress. It's relational. It has to be earned. To an unfamiliar dog in an unfamiliar place, a crying stranger doesn't register as someone in pain. It can just as easily register as something unpredictable, even threatening. So the comforting dog? Real, but conditional, which raises an uncomfortable follow-up question. If a dog's compassion depends entirely on trust, what does that say about animals we've already written off as not caring at all? There's one animal whose reputation couldn't be more different from the dog's. The science is about to turn that reputation upside down. Ask almost anyone. They'll tell you the same thing. Cats don't care. They tolerate you. It's the food they're loyal to, not you. Researchers at the University of Zurich decided to actually test that assumption. Not in a sterile lab. In real homes. People living alone with their cats. Observed over time. Going in, expectations were modest. Maybe a slight uptick in attention. What they found overturned the assumption entirely. When owners showed signs of depression, anxiety, or distress, their cats didn't pull back. They moved toward them, rubbing against their owner, vocalizing, staying physically close, specifically during the lowest emotional moments. And it wasn't just touching to witness. The interaction was linked to a measurable reduction in the owner's negative mood, comparable, statistically, to having a supportive human partner in the room. The indifferent cat was never indifferent. It was just quiet about paying attention. But here's where the story stays honest instead of tidy. That sensitivity had a limit. Cats reacted differently to their own owner's smile versus frown. A stranger's expression? It barely registered either way. So a cat's emotional radar isn't broken. It's personal, built entirely around you. Dogs comfort based on trust. Cats respond based on relationship. Which leads to the real question underneath all of this. Is this just about which animal happens to be smarter or sweeter? Or is something deeper going on? Something wired into the biology of connection itself? To find out, we have to leave the house completely. Horses aren't pets in the way dogs and cats are. They're prey animals. Evolutionarily, misreading danger can cost you your life. So researchers asked something bold. Could a horse read the emotional state of a human face it had never seen before? 28 horses. Large photographs. Some men smiling. Some with angry, teeth-bared expressions. What happened next was oddly specific. When horses looked at the angry faces, they consistently turned to view the photo with their left eye. Small detail. Significant meaning. The left eye routes visual information to the right hemisphere of the brain, the hemisphere more associated with processing threat. This wasn't a random glance. It lined up with how the horse's brain would be expected to route a perceived threat. And their heart rate spiked in that same moment, a real involuntary reaction to a photograph of a stranger's anger. Now, what about direct contact? This is where the evidence gets more careful and more interesting. Several small studies have found that when a horse and a human interact calmly together, their heart rhythms can move into closer alignment, sometimes with the human's stressed heart rate settling to match the horse's steadier one. It's worth being precise here. These are early, small-scale studies, and the effect appears to depend heavily on familiarity and the specific interaction. Researchers studying this in children, including a group with ADHD during structured equine sessions, found measurable synchronization patterns emerging within their first several sessions. But the scientists behind that work were careful to call these preliminary findings, not a settled conclusion. So not proof of a magic bond, but a real physiological signal worth taking seriously. Stop and take stock of where we are. A dog that may detect your stress by scent. A cat that reads your mood, but mostly yours. A horse whose own heart rhythm may shift in your presence. 3 different species, 3 different senses, 1 repeating pattern, which brings us, finally, to the question this whole investigation has been circling since the very first scene. Here's where even the scientists start to disagree. Is this real empathy? Animals genuinely understanding that you are suffering as someone separate from them? Or is it something simpler, a kind of automatic mirroring, where your distress triggers a matching physical state inside them? Something closer to the involuntary way a yawn spreads through a room. Most researchers land somewhere in between. These animals probably aren't performing conscious therapy on you, out of some deep understanding of your inner life. But biologically, many of them appear wired to register your emotional state, and once they do, to move toward you rather than away. So that moment your dog leaned into you while you cried, it likely wasn't your dog thinking, "My human is sad, and sadness is bad." It's closer to this. Its own body may have begun mirroring yours. And moving closer was the only way either of you knew how to make that feeling settle. That's not a smaller explanation. It might be a bigger one. Before we close this out, one more thread. Because not everything you've heard about animals reading human emotion turns out to be true. You've probably heard dolphins can heal emotional trauma. That swimming with them holds some special power science can't fully explain. Researchers reviewed decades of that research. What they found, the excitement of the experience, the novelty, not the dolphin, explained nearly all of the reported benefit. Compared properly against any other exciting activity, the healing effect disappeared. Not every viral animal story survives contact with a controlled experiment. This one didn't, which makes the evidence that did survive, the dogs, the cats, the horses, land even harder. Because that evidence held up. Study after study, test after test. So back to the floor, the tears, the dog that appeared out of nowhere. We know now it probably wasn't reading your mind. It was reading your body, the chemical shift in your breath, the crack in your voice, the collapse in your posture, signals you never consciously sent and never fully controlled either. And in that same moment, something in that animal's own body may have shifted too. Not a decision, not a thought, just a quiet, physical drift toward you instead of away. Science still can't tell you exactly where instinct ends and understanding begins. That line is still being drawn, one careful experiment at a time. Maybe that's the real mystery here. Not whether animals understand our heartbreak. Maybe it's why evolution kept building creatures that move toward suffering instead of away from it. That part, no study has fully answered yet.